Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're taking a look at Amazon, trying to see what their current market position is, what's been going on with their stock lately, and what experts are predicting for their future. Oh, and before I forget, if you like this kind of deep dive into these market happenings, please do us a favor and like the video and subscribe to the channel. All right, let's kick things off by checking out some intriguing actions from major investors. We saw Hoffman Allen N Investment Management, one of the big players who holds a lot of Amazon stock, just decided to cut down their stake in the company by 1.7% last quarter.
And the interesting thing here is that even after they reduced their holdings, Amazon still remains their second biggest investment. It makes up almost a quarter of their entire portfolio. Can you believe that? We're talking about a stake that's currently worth a cool $53 million.
Wow. Okay, so it seems like they're tweaking things a little bit, but they're definitely not jumping ship anytime soon. What's everyone else doing? I mean, what are other institutional investors up to?
It's actually a mixed bag right now. Some firms like Wrench Wealth Management and Foundations Investment Advisors, they actually bumped up their Amazon stakes last quarter. But then you've got others like Blankenship and Foster, Umpqua Bank, and One Wealth Capital Management. All of them actually decreased their positions.
So it's like a bit of a tug of war going on.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Even with all this back and forth, institutional investors as a whole still hold a massive 72.24% of Amazon stock. That says a lot about the level of confidence they have in Amazon.
For sure. Now, let's switch gears for a second and see what the experts are saying. What's the word on the street about Amazon's future? What are the analysts thinking?
Well, get this. The overall feeling from analysts is actually pretty optimistic. We've seen a bunch of major financial institutions, even big names like Morgan Stanley and JP Chase & Co., actually raising their price targets for Amazon stock. They're giving it ratings like overweight or outperform.
Can you give us some examples of exactly how much they've raised their targets?
Oh, absolutely. So Morgan Stanley, for example, they decided to increase their price objective from $230 to a whopping $280 per share. JP Chase & Co., they did the same thing, raised theirs from $250 to $280 as well. Oh, and we can't forget about Wedbush. They went from $250 to $260, and they're still keeping their outperform rating.
Those are some pretty big increases. So what's the overall consensus among the analysts then?
Well, it looks like the general consensus is a moderate buy rating for Amazon right now, and the average price target they're giving it is $249.02. Seems like they think there's still a lot of potential for growth there.
Interesting. Okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty now and look at Amazon's actual stock performance. Where did it open on Monday?
So Amazon kicked off Monday, January 27th at $234.85 per share.
Okay, and just to put things in perspective for our viewers, could you maybe go over some of the key financial figures?
No problem. Right now, Amazon has a gigantic market cap of $2.47 trillion. Its price-to-earnings ratio is sitting at 50.29, and its debt-to-equity ratio is looking pretty healthy at 0.21.
What about those moving averages? What are they looking like?
So the 50-day moving average is currently at $220.27, and the 200-day moving average is at $197.45. Looking back over the past year, we can see the stock hit a low of $151.61 and reached a high of $236.40. It's definitely been a bit of a roller coaster ride, but overall it seems to be trending upwards.
It really does. Let's move on to how their earnings have been doing lately. How'd they do in the last quarter?
Well, they actually did better than the analysts predicted when it came to their earnings per share. They reported $1.43 EPS, beating the expected $1.14.
That's a pretty significant beat. How about their revenue?
Revenue was strong too. They brought in a total of $158.88 billion for the quarter, an 11% increase compared to last year. Even that was a little higher than the $157.28 billion that analysts had predicted.
So clearly they're still bringing in a ton of revenue. What's the prediction for their earnings per share for the whole year?
Analysts are currently forecasting an EPS of 5.39 for Amazon this year.
All right. So far, we've covered what investors are doing, what the analysts are thinking, and how their recent performance looks. Let's wrap up this part by looking at what's been happening with insider trading. Anything interesting going on there?
Actually, yeah, there have been a couple of pretty big insider stock sales recently. Director Jonathan Rubinstein sold 4,351 shares of Amazon stock back on December 9th at an average price of $229.85 per share. That's a transaction worth just over $1 million.
Were there any other sales that stand out?
Yeah, CEO Matthew S. Garman decided to sell some of his Amazon holdings too. He sold 15,260 shares on November 21st for an average price of $200 $200.19. That one came out to a little over $3 million.
Interesting. How do those sales fit into the bigger picture of what insiders have been doing?
Well, over the past 90 days, insiders have sold a grand total of 6,032,344 shares of company stock, which is worth about $1.25 billion. It might seem like a lot, but remember, people often sell their stock for personal financial reasons, so it doesn't automatically mean they're losing confidence in the company.
Right, that's a good point. So we've covered a lot of ground here, and it seems like there are mixed signals when it comes to what the future holds for Amazon. We'll be back in just a bit to discuss what all these signals might mean and what investors should be watching out for. And hey, if you're liking our analysis so far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Yeah, there are a lot of different factors at play here. On one hand, you have investors who are making some adjustments to their portfolios, but then you have analysts who are actually quite optimistic about Amazon's future. And on top of that, their recent earnings have been pretty solid, but then you throw in these insider stock sales, which could be interpreted in a number of ways.
Definitely a lot to consider. So how do we put all of this information together and figure out what it all means? What's our next move?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? It seems like there's a sort of push and pull happening between a few different forces. For one thing, Amazon's main businesses are still performing really well, especially their cloud computing division, AWS. That's a huge part of their revenue growth.
Right, and you can't forget about their massive presence in the world of e-commerce, even though competition in that area is definitely getting tougher.
Absolutely. And that's why you see these analysts who are so optimistic about Amazon's potential to keep expanding and innovating. But then there are also these other factors that might be making some investors a little more cautious.
Like what kinds of things are giving investors pause?
Well, the overall economic situation is one thing. There's always a chance that the economy could slow down, which could lead to people spending less money, and obviously that would affect Amazon.
And then there's all the talk about increased regulations for these big tech companies.
Exactly. That's definitely something to keep in mind. And then you have those insider stock sales. Like we said, it's not always a sign of trouble, but it does raise the question of whether those who are closest to the company might have some concerns about how things are going to play out in the near future.
It sounds like there are both positive and potentially negative things to consider. What should investors be paying attention to over the next few months to really get a clearer picture of where Amazon is heading?
I think the most important thing to focus on is their earnings reports. Are they consistently meeting or even exceeding the revenue and earnings growth that analysts are predicting? That's really the most basic indicator of how healthy their business is.
And what about AWS specifically? Should investors be keeping an extra close eye on that, given how important it is to Amazon?
For sure. AWS is a major factor in Amazon's profitability, so it's crucial to watch how it's performing. Is it growing faster or slower? How is it doing against competitors like Microsoft Azure and Google Cloud?
Are there any other financial indicators that investors should have on their radar?
Keep an eye on their operating margins. Amazon has always been known for putting a lot of money into new projects to fuel growth, which can sometimes mean they don't make as much profit in the short term. So the question is, can they maintain or even improve their operating margins as they continue to expand?
Right, so earnings reports, AWS performance, and operating margins are all important financial factors to consider. But what about the things that aren't directly related to their finances? What else should investors be thinking about?
I'd say it's important to stay informed about what's happening with regulations. Are there any new antitrust investigations or laws being proposed that could change the way Amazon does business? The regulatory landscape can change pretty quickly, so staying up to date is key.
It's easy to get caught up in the numbers, but those external factors can have a huge impact. And speaking of external factors, Amazon is always known for being ambitious and expanding into new markets and industries. Is that something that investors should take into account?
Definitely. Amazon is constantly exploring new opportunities for growth, healthcare, grocery delivery, entertainment, you name it. It's worth tracking how those initiatives are doing and whether they're gaining traction. Are they really shaking things up in these established industries and carving out a place for themselves?
Exactly, because success in those areas could have a big impact on their growth trajectory in the future. Are there any other things that investors should be watching out for?
I think it's also smart to pay attention to what's happening with their innovation pipeline. Amazon has a pretty good track record of coming up with revolutionary products and services. The question is, what new technologies or business models are they working on? Are they staying ahead of the game in areas like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and e-commerce? Those are all things that could have a significant impact on their long-term success.
It sounds like investors really need to look beyond just the quarterly earnings reports and think about Amazon's strategy, the competition they're facing, and the overall context of the market.
I'd say that's a pretty good summary. It's all about connecting the dots, understanding the bigger trends, and figuring out whether Amazon is in a good position to deal with the challenges and seize the opportunities that are out there.
This has been a really insightful conversation. So, as we wrap up this part of our discussion, what are your parting thoughts for our listeners? What's the one question they should be asking themselves when it comes to Amazon's potential as an investment?
I think the most important question is this: is Amazon still a growth story, or have they reached a point where their best days are behind them?
That's a great point. On one hand, they're a massive company with a huge reach and a long history of innovation. But on the other hand, they're facing more and more competition, increasing scrutiny from regulators, and the inherent difficulty of maintaining growth at such a large scale.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a complex situation with no simple answers. But by carefully considering everything we've talked about today and continuing to follow what's happening with Amazon, investors can form their own informed opinions about whether the company's future looks bright or whether the potential risks outweigh the rewards.
That's great advice.
Okay, so as we wrap things up here, let's give our listeners something to really think about. We've gone over all the data, the opinions from the analysts, the financial performance, but there's always that bigger picture to consider.
One thing that really strikes me is how much Amazon's story mirrors the way our economy and technology have evolved as a whole. They've grown alongside the rise of e-commerce, the shift towards cloud computing, and the increasing power of these big tech companies.
And now it's like we're at this crossroads where regulators and policymakers are trying to figure out how to deal with the implications of that very power. It really makes you wonder, is Amazon just too big to fail at this point? Or could they actually be vulnerable to disruption in ways we haven't even thought of yet? That's the fascinating thing about the market, isn't it? It's constantly changing, and even giants like Amazon can't escape those changes. I think the real question is, what are the possible scenarios that could play out in the future?
Are we heading towards a world where Amazon just keeps getting bigger, expanding into more and more markets, and becoming even more deeply embedded in our lives? Or will we see some kind of shift, maybe through regulations, antitrust actions, or even just new competitors who figure out how to challenge their dominance?
And we can't forget about the impact of new technologies. Could something like quantum computing or a truly decentralized internet come along and completely change the game, creating opportunities for entirely new players to emerge?
There are so many questions, so much uncertainty. But that's what makes following all of this so interesting. The only thing we can say for sure is that the future of Amazon, and really the entire tech landscape, is impossible to predict with certainty.
And that's why it's so important to stay curious, stay informed, and keep our eyes on what's coming next.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We hope you found this discussion about Amazon stimulating and insightful. And as always, if you've been enjoying our content, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep asking those big questions.